When many consider German watchmaking, there are essentially four camps. The Bauhaus-influenced Nomos and Junghans, the tool watches from brands such as Zinn, Müller Glashütte, and Damasco, the Fliegers from the likes of Laco and Stova as a couple examples, and their high-end bespoke timepieces most often associated with Lange. However, there is one brand that is uniquely positioned in the world of German watchmaking, offering elements of Lange in a price range that is much closer to the core pack of German brands, and that is Glashütte Original. GO is a brand that, for the money, I think offers a level of finishing and in-house watchmaking that is pretty much unparalleled in Germany, as well as perhaps anywhere in the entire industry. And if you don't believe me, today we're going to be looking at a great example that might prove that case with the Panomatic Lunar, a stunning looking dress piece that might just have the best looking movement that I have seen in this price range. So in this video, we're going to go through a little bit of backstory about this brand and model, talk a little bit more about the watch, and then also discuss why this watch is kind of just more than a Lange 1 alternative. Let's jump into it. All right guys, now before we jump into this video looking at a great German watch, check out some other great German watches on Baldassarre.com, including from Müller Glashütte, Laco, Nomos, Junghans. We're an authorized dealer of all these brands. If you're wanting to go for the tool watch look, definitely go for Müller Glashütte. Great utilitarian approach to design while also having some fun in the process with things like their Panavas, as well as say like their Promare Go or SAR Rescue Timer. You could also look at Laco if you're talking about maybe the best entry door into Flieger watches. And finally looking at Nomos and Junghans for more of that minimalist Bauhaus influence that's going to be stemming from these models. Have reviews on pretty much all these different brands on the channel as well as on the review channel, so check those out, as well as checking them out on Baldassarre.com. Starting out with just a bit of background, Glashütte Original is one of a dozen German watchmakers located in Glashütte, Germany, the historical heart of German watchmaking tradition since the 1800s. It all started back in 1845 when a string of watchmakers relocated from Switzerland to the then sleepy German town and quickly set up several powerful watchmaking enterprises. Within several decades, Glashütte became a global leader in movement production, and even Swiss brands began copying Glashütte-built calibers. Real Glashütte-based brands responded by engraving Glashütte Original on their movements, a move that serves as the source of inspiration for the brand's current moniker. In World War II, Glashütte was largely destroyed by Allied bombing, and even after the war, much of what remained in terms of machinery and tooling vital to watchmaking was sent to the Soviet Union as war reparations. In an effort to rebuild its watchmaking industry, the East German government amalgamated what was left of the brands in the industry in 1951 into one state-operated watch company called GUB. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, what was left of the GUB eventually officially became what we know as today Glashütte Original in 1994, and since then, the brand has grown to become a true luxury watchmaker with arguably some of the best finished movements in all of the world of horology, with the Panomatic Lunar that we're going to be looking at today being an excellent example of just that. So the Panomatic Lunar was introduced in 2003 and has been updated several times over the years in a number of different dial colors and case materials, with the current collection being available in both stainless steel and in gold. In fairness, the Lange 1 so often subjected to comparison with this piece was released way back in 1993, with the moon phase version following in 2002, a year before the Panomatic Lunar's release. With that in mind, I think it's important to just put it out there front that there is a similar overall visual design concept at play here that was likely inspired, at least to some degree, by the mighty Lange 1. That said, I think people are a bit too quick to write off this watch given the connection, as for a stainless steel version, we're talking about a completely different world, while still offering a staggering level of finishing when you flip this watch over. Now, we handle hundreds of watches on a daily basis in our office, and after you see many different timepieces out there, you just tend to get desensitized to what is in front of you. But as soon as this watch came in, everyone in our office, from high-end independent enthusiasts to entry-level collectors, all had the same reaction when they saw this watch and this movement. And it was just a simple, wow, this is very well finished. Unlike the GOCQ that we covered and were a bit harder on since it didn't show off the movement, which I think is, again, the #1 selling point about this watch, this Panomatic Lunar did not make the same mistake, offering a view of the automatic in-house caliber, the 9019 within. Now the 9019 is a truly beautiful, and I like to not be overly emphatic when discussing watches, but I'm hard pressed to think of a better looking finished movement in a watch under $10,000. Unpacking the finishing, it starts with Glashütte ribbing across the 3/4 plate with a mirroring englage on the edge with a skeletonized micro rotor with a 21 karat gold oscillating weight. Instead of recessing the entire area of the plate where the micro rotor is going to sit, there is a recessed channel for the rotor to freely spin with fine grained finish within. It showcases an array of blued screws and several of the watch's 47 jewels. The balance bridge is also a stunner and is fully hand engraved top of Geo's signature dual-plex swan neck regulator system. Generally speaking, the swan neck regulator design often seen from Geo and other German watchmakers provides more sensitive adjustment to the balance wheel while assisting in resistance against shock, enabling a more secure balance assembly. This duplex swan neck takes the concept further still, with one swan neck system intended to fine-tune the rate and therefore the timing, and the other for adjusting the symmetry of the pallet fork, which optimizes the escapement's function, making for an overall more precise caliber while also looking striking in the process. Looking beyond the level of finishing on display here, we also have two intriguing complications taking place and a non-standard timing display. So a caliber that is equal parts visually appealing and also technically impressive from a pure watchmaking point of view. The movement operates at 28,800 vibrations per hour, 4 Hertz, features hacking and hand winding, has a power reserve of 42 hours, probably the only mediocre part about this movement. And when testing at 5 positions, we found that these were running on average 2 seconds off from perfect time of day. But simply put, if we're talking about retail prices for under $10,000, I am really struggling to think of another watch that is just better finished than this one in terms of the movement. You're getting some hand engraving on that balance bridge. That's something that Lange does, and it's kind of just a kind of calling card for their brand. Again, I don't want to keep mentioning Lange, but it just gives context to how impressive this is. Mostly happening here is machine finishing for the most part, but you're getting some true high horology techniques in a price tag that I think is pretty competitive and also just showcases the #1 aspect of this watch. The movement is spectacular. But now let's take a look at the front of the watch, which isn't necessarily as maybe striking, but still a very pretty dial to look at. Shifting over to the dial, the Panomatic Lunar, let's now get into the aspect of the watch that feels a bit more familiar and is probably the main point of criticism. Of course, with inspiration stemming from another Glashütte manufacturer, but it is still well done. It opts for a primary dial surface executed in a galvanic silver with the majority finished with a matte opaline effect. On the left side of the dial, time-telling duties are handled with a set of 2 overlapping dials, with a larger display tracking the hour and minutes, with heat-blued, surprisingly loomed alpha hands set over the finely engraved concentric circles, as well as hand-applied diamond-polished indices. Just below and neatly in line, a contemporary small second sub-register with its own heat-blue hand tracks the seconds. At approximately the 2 o'clock position, the dial surface is cut away and slopes down neatly towards the moon phase indicator resting beneath, which is executed in a deep glossy blue with a polished moon and stars that catch the light impressively despite their smaller size. And as one final box to check off, we have one of the more German complications on the market with a big date, which Geo calls their Pano date, resting beneath its own faceted window. Geo's Pano date display is facilitated with 2 totally separated circular wheels, one for each digit, with each resting on the same plane, making for an almost uninterrupted digital date display that is of course larger and a lot more legible than the standard complication. Despite the amount of information offered by this dial, the overall look is actually surprisingly spaced out. This abundance of negative space does make this feel a bit more sterile compared to that of the Lange 1, and its use of every millimeter of its real estate without feeling cluttered. However, this dial is still beautiful. Moving into a conversation on the case and wearing experience, the Panomatic Lunar comes in with a wearable 40mm by 47mm case that will work well on the majority of wrists, offering a significant but unobtrusive amount of presence for its size, both thanks to its slim bezel as well as the additional impact offered by a white dial. In comparing the front of the watch to the back, it seems clear a lot of the diameter is stemming from the size of the actual caliber itself. And while appropriate for the level of complexity in this caliber and being an automatic, this watch does measure in at 12.7 millimeters of thickness, with at least 1 millimeter or more of that coming from that slightly domed sapphire crystal. With that in mind, the watch is thicker than many other dress watches on the market, but few dress watches are showcasing this level of complexity. When it comes to case finishing, the methodology here is relatively restrained, at least compared to the caliber. The sheer sides of the case are horizontally brushed and fall away abruptly from the base of the highly polished step bezel, with another hit of polishing both on top of the lugs as well as on the slim bevel at their outer edges. A signed crown rests at the 3 o'clock position without the safety of crown guards and is highly polished to stand out from the rest of the case sides. Just above there is a small pusher used to calibrate the position of the moon phase complication in its 29.5-day cycle. And keeping the GO in place on the wrist is a 20mm genuine alligator leather strap with a matte finish and dyed a deep navy blue back with calfskin, and complete with a signed double deployment buckle, which is also impressively well finished. The GO is engraved in the buckle with vertical brush strokes and faceted sides for more of a 3-dimensional effect. Now, when anybody talks about this watch, they typically are going to bring up the Lange 1, and I'm sorry for bringing it up so much. It just seems to always be the thing that comes up in comments and just conversation when people talk about this watch. But I think it's more than just a Lange 1 alternative, and a watch that certainly stands on its own in many aspects, and also just where it's positioned. Now, first, let's just discuss the idea and the reality of the situation, which is the Lange 1 is coming in north of $40,000, and I know that's probably even changing and going up even more since I probably last looked. It's just an expensive watch. That is the Rolls-Royce of German watchmaking in many ways. There's no question about it. But this watch in many aspects is bringing things to the table and kind of sits in no man's land in some way in terms of German watchmaking. You have a heavily populated range from, say, under $1,000 up to, say, $5,000 in terms of different just brands throwing their hat into the ring, from the likes of many of the brands that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. But very few are being represented in that range, basically up from that up until Lange. But the separation from GO to the jump to Lange is such a significant jump. We're talking about $30,000 to $40,000 in many instances. Now, you can get an entry-level Saxonia for around 17 grand or so, depending on what variation that you're going for. So that is something to consider. But in terms of the actual finishing on this movement, again, I really don't think that you are going to find a better finished movement than this one in the price range. And that is really saying something. You have the likes of JLC, Zenith, and a lot of other brands in this category. But for this range, typically to get that level of finish, you're going for probably some more expensive JLC models, or maybe getting into kind of the upper echelon of high horology brands. But that doesn't usually happen for another $10,000 more to at least be spent. So with that being considered, this Panomatic Lunar and just all of the Pano models from the GO collection, these are watches that I think best epitomize what GO does best and brings to the table. Now, the dial design is not going to be on the Lange 1's level. I think the use of negative space is not as sound on this watch compared to something like that. Again, sorry for mentioning it over and over again, but it just has to be brought up. But when you look at something like the CQ, which is a beautiful watch, very well finished, but it doesn't showcase one of the #1 propositions from a selling standpoint that watch brings to the table compared to the other dive watching competition, which is very tough in that price range, and that is not having an open case back. This one learns from that mistake and benefits from having this open case back. And in terms of a dress watch in the $10,000 range, this one is positioned in a very nice light. But all right, guys, love to see your comments down below. What do you think of this GO Panomatic Lunar? I've always been a fan of German watchmaking, as many of you guys know, and this watch specifically, but it just kind of falls in this strange gray area, which makes it almost more compelling because there's really not much else there, both from Germany and even Switzerland, that I think kind of stacks up well. Again, we are talking about a dress watch at the end of the day, which isn't really the most popular watch out there or type at the moment, but still, this is a beautiful watch, no question about it. But love to see what you guys think down below. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. That's a great indicator for me, just covering watches that maybe aren't covered as much as, say, other more popular models. This is just great to see that you guys appreciate it and want to see more of it. So please do give it a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Also, definitely go check out the other German brands that we have available on TeddyBaldassarre.com as well. Full authorized dealer of all the brands that we carry. And if you want to stay up to date with the content, also follow along on Instagram and see some great photos of watches in the process. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.